Today we're making sourdough and I'm going to be instructing you through the process with this video just in case the recipe doesn't make sense written out. In this bigger glass bowl I have 400 grams of bread flour. I like using King Arthur bread flour. It's just really great quality. It has a good, a nice high gluten percentage. So basically it's just good stuff. You can use regular bread flour if you want, but if you do find King Arthur, definitely snag it because it's also great for pizza and all that kind of stuff. In this smaller glass bowl, I have whole wheat flour. You can do it 100% bread flour, but in this recipe, I'm doing 80% bread flour and 20% whole wheat because the whole wheat makes it a little darker of a loaf, like the crumb is more brown than white, but it also adds a awesome flavor that I really like and I don't want to replace. So that's why I'm using whole wheat. You can get whole wheat flour at the Amish market if you're shopping locally. That's locally milled flour, and so it's great. It's just like King Arthur, it has that high gluten content. But if you can't find it locally in the grocery store, if I could recommend one brand, I would recommend Bob's Red Mill. It is a little bit more on the pricey side, but definitely worth it. Along with my flours, I have about 10 grams of salt in this little bowl. Next is 325 grams of warm water. Now the key word is warm. I'm not gonna give you a specific temperature. Just make sure that when you stick your finger in it, it's not like cold. You know, you wouldn't wanna be like, wow, I really wanna drink this right now. You know, not that kind of temperature of water. But you also don't want it to be so warm that it's almost hot to the touch, because if it is, and if it exceeds 110 degrees Fahrenheit, then it will kill your sourdough, and then you won't have any living thing to raise your bread. In preparation for this recipe, you're gonna need your sourdough starter. Today, I fed it this morning around 9 o'clock, or 8 o'clock, and then I fed it again around 3:30. Typically you don't do that. Typically you do it every 12 hours, but this time you need it to be at its peak. The point of using your sourdough at this state is to ensure that it will be on the proper timeline, I guess, when you are putting it in your loaf. This recipe, you can do a lot with your day because you're letting it rest and proof overnight, which basically means you're letting your sourdough feed on all of this good flour that's going into it and the water, and it causes it to rise and build that gluten structure overnight so that you don't have to work at it every 30 minutes in your day. So the first step in actually making your bread, I've transferred the sourdough that was in that jar into just this bowl so that it was easier to work with. So you're gonna mix 100 grams of this active starter. So remember, using your kitchen weight, your kitchen scale, just put in about 100 grams. And you're gonna mix it with your 325 grams of warm water. In this large bowl, you're just gonna combine your flour, so your 400 grams of bread flour, your 100 grams of whole wheat flour, and your 10 to 15, in this case 13 grams of flour. And you're just gonna mix that together. You can use your hands, get in there. I actually prefer using my hands to mix stuff because you can like feel what's going on, and also you're gonna have to wash your hands after this anyway. Why dirty up another utensil? Okay, so after this is just well combined, it's not rocket science, and then you're gonna combine your wet mixture. I like to give this a last little stir because sometimes the stuff that wasn't mixed in sinks to the bottom and then it's just like tricky. So this is what you should look like before you mix it. You're gonna mix this together with your hands for as long as it takes to get all this dry. If you look here, this is all wet and shaggy, like it doesn't look like dough, but this is all dry. So it's gonna take some time. So knead this for about 5 minutes, and yeah. After you've incorporated all that flour and your dough is well combined and there's no dry bits remaining, you're just gonna let it rest for about 50 minutes. This is just gonna give the dough a chance to relax. Right now it's in this taut ball. It might flatten out, it might not. Again, it's this low hydration, so don't expect it to, you know, flatten out like a little puddle. It might stay like a taut ball. So you can cover this with plastic wrap or a towel, but just leave it at room temperature. It's about 9-10 now, so that whole process should take about 10 minutes. And then by 10 o'clock, you'll do your coil fold, which I'll explain, and then go to bed. Wake up the next morning, ready to rumble.
So this is what the bread will look like after the 50 minutes of resting. It didn't flatten out, but it's about time for its coil fold.
For the coil fold, you're gonna wet your fingertips just so that it can help release the edges of the dough from the side of the bowl. And you're going to, you know, put more water on your fingers as needed. And you're just gonna try to work the middle part up. And you're gonna stretch it so that it kind of stretches above the rest of the dough, if that makes sense. And you just let it kind of fall on top of what you've lifted. I know, looks funky. More water. And you're gonna lift up the middle. In this part, this section, you're gonna tuck under. And you're gonna spin it around. Wet your fingers again. Lift it back up from the middle. And this section releases from the bowl with some guidance. And it tucks under that middle section. And you're just gonna do one more to make the edges nice and neat. So again, wet your fingers, lift it up from the middle. Pull this edge and kind of let that fall underneath where you've lifted. Spin it around. Do the same thing for the last side. So now you have this nice taut little rectangular looking thing. And that's all you do. You put your towels back on top of the bowl and you let this rest overnight. It's about 10:20 right now because this got delayed a little bit, but tomorrow morning around 7 or 8 in the morning, we'll do our next step.
This is what the bread looked like the next morning. It rose a little bit, but other than that, it looks pretty normal.
Alright, it's the next morning around 7 a.m. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wet my fingers to loosen up the dough from the sides of the bowl. And I'm going to coil fold it on to this cutting board. It's dry, there's no flour on it or anything. This taut little piece of dough hanging out up here. What you're gonna do is you're gonna shape it. I like using a bench scraper. It helps to give you an extra hand that won't stick as bad to the dough. So you just kind of like tuck it under your dough and try to create just like a little ball. So this is my little ball. You can see right here, I've got a little air bubble. Totally normal. You don't really have to worry about that right now. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to put a towel over top of it, so that it doesn't dry out and get this layer of skin or film. And I'm just gonna let that rest for about 15 minutes. So I floured my proofing basket while I was waiting for this to rest for that 15 minutes. If you don't have a Banneton, you can just take like a regular bowl and line it with a kitchen towel and flour it heavily as well. I like using rice flour because it's a gluten-free flour and it doesn't get absorbed by your dough as it's resting, and so basically it just guarantees that your dough won't stick. For this final shaping, to shape this circle into this banneton. It's a little tricky of a process, but that's what I'm going to show you. So you're going to flip over your dough, and you're going to kind of stretch it out so that it kind of looks like a rectangle. And then you're gonna flip this bottom third and pull it up about a third or so. And the stick is gonna stick within itself because we're not using flour. And then you're going to pull one of these sides over towards the middle, and it'll stick by itself. And then the other side you'll pull over the middle. And then for this top part, you're gonna take one corner and pull it towards the middle, and the other corner and pull it towards the middle. And you're just gonna let it stick, hang out like that. There will be bubbles. And then the last step is to flip it upside down like that. And what you're gonna do is you're kind of gonna roll it like a cinnamon bun. So you'll take this like you're eating a burger, kind of pull it and stretch it back and do the same process. And now instead of getting a circle shape, you have kind of like this this oval shape. The same way that you used your bench scraper to create your circle, you're just going to tuck the sides underneath to build that tension on the top. And then you're going to put it into your proofing basket, seam side up, which means that flat, tense side is going to be face down. And then the last step is probably the easiest, where you probably just stitch it, which is just grabbing 2 pieces of dough from each side and crossing them over. If that doesn't work for you, if it doesn't stick, another thing is just pinching the seam together like this to create like a lip. And then you're gonna take some more flour. Again, I like using rice flour, but if you can't find it, which is totally normal, I don't expect you to, just use all-purpose. You'll just need more of it. So sprinkle it on top. And really make sure that you like get it on the sides. Sometimes you can even pull it away and really work it into the sides. Then you'll cover it with a towel and let this rest for an hour. After about an hour of just letting your dough to rest, you're gonna do a poke test. I don't expect it to be ready after this hour, but you just kind of have to do it. What you're gonna do is you're going to gently poke the dough. If you see that it springs back, then it's not ready. Like here. See how it springs back? It's not ready. If it leaves an indent, then you're good. Right now, it's kind of looking like it's leaving those indents. I'm just gonna let it rest for probably another half an hour or so. All right, it's been another half an hour or so. Again, it hasn't risen much. It hasn't risen much from the last time that it's been here, but I thought I'd do the poke test one last time. All right, time for a poke test. Again, I'm gonna do it right here. Poke. It bounces back, but it leaves that indent. Let's do it in the middle. Yeah, look, she's leaving a little dimple in there. Yeah, so this is what I would call a loaf that's ready to be baked with. If it doesn't leave that dimple and it just bounces back all the way, let it go another half an hour and just keep checking every half an hour. So your timeline on this, after you shape it and you put it in your banneton, you let it rest for an hour, just as your base level. Then after that hour, you do the poke test. If it doesn't pass, wait a half an hour and come back to it. This is why I'm saying it's very versatile to do during your day, because you can be doing online school and getting up every half an hour or so just to check on your bread and go back to what you're doing. It's tricky though because there's never a set time that you need to be baking your bread because it all depends on the weather that day. Usually it takes me about 2.5, 3 hours to get it going, and usually that happens to be around 11:30 noon, depending on the time that I start getting my bread going in the morning. This morning I woke up around 7 to get it started because I was anticipating my day looking different than what it is. And so now it's about 10:30ish, and we're good to go. And you know, that's an hour sooner than I thought I would be. So at first I thought I was a little wrong, but I have to keep in mind I started an hour earlier. Okay, so as soon as your loaf passes the poke test, you're going to be putting your banneton in this plastic bag. Just a plastic grocery bag will do the trick. Everybody should have one of those. And then you're going to move this to the freezer. As you move it to the freezer, you're going to preheat the oven to about 450 degrees Fahrenheit with your Dutch oven inside. This is a Dutch oven. You can find them at Home Goods if you don't have one. I assume everybody has one. It's kind of like a signature kitchen gadget, I guess. And it's this very heavy duty cast iron pot, and its purpose of being cast iron is so that it can withstand super duper trooper hot temperatures. So this is what you'll be using in your oven. Do not substitute this with any other kind of pot. This is where I draw the line. I know I said it's pandemic friendly. If you do not have a cast iron pan or pot, do not do this recipe. Do not follow this recipe because this is what's gonna work your magic for you. The banneton can be substituted with a different mechanism, that bowl with the towel inside of it. The bench scraper is not necessary, but highly recommended. It is a great kitchen tool for pretty much any bread baking, cookies. If you're, if it's pie crust, if it's sticking to your counter, just use that to help release it. It's just a great kitchen tool. Highly recommend getting one. It's like $5. It doesn't have to be metal. It can be plastic. Whatever works for you. I think the last major kitchen tool that I will be using is a baker's lom. I bought this one off of Amazon for like $10 or something, and I know it may seem expensive. This is probably the most expensive item to buy for the sole purpose of baking this bread, other than the cast iron pot. Basically, a lom is a razor blade on a stick. This helps with scoring because it's extremely sharp and it's small, so you can really work it in there. The substitute for this that I've used in the past is a serrated knife. It has those sharp edges. The only tricky thing about it is you have to be very, very confident with it. Meaning you can't hesitate, you just kind of have to go for it. And if you get your cut wrong in the beginning, then it's hard to bounce back from that. So I highly recommend getting a lom. Alright, it's been about 45 minutes. The Dutch oven has been preheated, hanging out right here next to me. And I just took the loaf out of the freezer. Here it is in all of its cold glory. Ta-da! I'm going to use some cornmeal on this cutting board that I have because, one, when cornmeal's baked, it burns. Well, yeah, it does burn, but it also adds this really nice flavor to your bread. Right now, I pulled my Dutch oven out of the oven, and I have my cutting board covered in cornmeal, and I have my loaf that's cold out of the freezer, and I have just the spray bottle with water, and I have my lom right here, my razor blade on a stick. So I'm going to show you how to work everything. Alright, so I haven't taken the lid off my Dutch oven yet just because I'm trying to encase all that heat in there as long as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tip my bread onto my cutting board, and it just falls right out.
It's nice and taut. I'm gonna brush off all this extra flour just because I don't really need it on there. And what I'm gonna do is I am going to draw a little, just for funsies, I'm gonna draw a little design with my lamb. Just because I feel like it makes it look pretty. And now I'm going to slice it. So I'm gonna try to make this easy. Right around here, you're going to try to cut it at a 45-degree angle along the side. And you want it to be deep. And you kind of do it like aggressively. And I'd say about 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch cut. Because what it's gonna do is when the heat, when it tries to escape, it's gonna push up this layer.
So now is the time that you're going to be transferring your loaf into your Dutch oven. So what I like to do if I'm not using parchment is to scoop it up with 2 spatulas and drop it in. Then you're going to spray it with water until the flour on top of your loaf doesn't look like flour anymore. So until it's wet, and you will see the steam come out of the pan like you just did. And spray it a little bit more, put your lid on, and then you'll put it in the oven for 25 minutes.
So I'm going to try explaining scoring to you just to make sure that you have the right idea. The purpose of scoring is to create a outlet for all of that steam and gas that's going to be released from your dough that's going to let it rise. If you just put your dough in and you don't score it, you're making a mistake because the steam's going to find its way out eventually, and it can't just be trapped in there. So what it's going to do is it's going to crack your loaf in random places. It's going to make it really hard to cut, and it's just not going to be a good loaf. So that's the main purpose of scoring. A bunch of people do like pretty scores where they do like shallow like slits in your dough, which is what I did because I think it's pretty. But basically, when you score, you don't want it to be perpendicular to your dough, because if it is, if you think about the gas coming out, what it's gonna do is it's gonna push those 2 edges away from each other. So instead of getting a tall loaf, you're gonna get this really wide loaf because the gas is coming out of that straight cut that's right, you know, like a slit in your dough, like a zipper almost, and it's going to push those lips of the cut away, and thus making your dough like a puddle. I've made that mistake before. It's a very small, it's like this thick and like this long, and it's not good. The best degree to kind of eyeball is about a 45-degree angle, and if you don't need a protractor, you don't want it to be straight across, but you kind of want it at that angle, because if you see the gas pushing out, it'll push that top lip up and over, so it'll create a really nice ear on your sourdough, and you'll see that in a bunch of professional sourdough photos. Okay, it beeped, and I'm ready to take the lid off, but I wanted to show you what it looks like along with me. Yeah, there are. Ta-da! It's risen, and you can see the ear, and now you put it in for another 15 to 20 minutes. Start with 15. All right, we're out of the oven. Ouch, of the oven. This is how dark I usually like it. This is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to scoring. You can see that there's flour down here in this line, like right abrupt, right here. That's where I sliced it. Then the CO2 pushed up and over this part of the cut that was here, which is why there's that really nice gluten structure right here. I don't know if you can see that very well with this camera. These are the bubbles. And here's my design. Now we have to wait 2 hours to cut into it. So I would call this a massive success. Definitely try it out.